Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome back, I hope you've had a good morning and enjoyed that, and welcome to the Love My Tender session. I hope you're here in this big room because you're interested in the subject matter rather than the dodgy pun in the title, but hopefully we can fill that with some really interesting content and help you really look at the different ways in which some very different organisations actually have looked at embedding social value from a procurement perspective. I think, as we've heard already this morning, there's agreement from everyone that social value is a good thing and a good idea, and everyone likes it and thinks it's great. The real challenge then is how do you make it happen, how do you embed it? I think we're going to discuss that through the course of the next hour or so. The other thing I think that's been quite interesting from our perspective, obviously we, Social Enterprise UK, have been involved in the Act since it was a bill a long time ago, when it was very much focused on the public sector and how we can get the public sector to commission better and do things better. And really what's been fascinating and what this event is testament to actually is that the Act has really transcended that kind of public sector mindset, and now social value, or having social value in procurement, is something that we're seeing across private business, across the social enterprise sector itself, across the charity sector, as well as across the public sector. And on the panel today, it's great that we've got representatives from each of those sectors in the form of Natalie from the City of London Local Authority, in the form of James from Future 21, a social enterprise, and Richard from ASDA, obviously a large business. And who would have thought that a supermarket would be looking at social value and taking it seriously in the way they have? And that's a really fantastic testament to what can be done and what can be achieved. And hopefully, as I say, this will be a really practical opportunity to think about that in more detail. So I'll stop there. I think that's probably enough from me. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, so do start thinking about that and I think the other thing I think that'd be worthwhile as we go through these is just to think about some of the common challenges across three very different organisations in very different environments, and some of the common ways in which those have been overcome or are being dealt with that I think are common to your organisations as much as they are to the ones up here. So that's enough from me. Without further ado, I will pass over to Natalie, who will tell you about the City of London and the great work they've been doing.
So hello there everyone. Thanks very much for having me along, Charlie. I'm really pleased to be here today. The main reason I'm here is basically to share some of the good stuff that we've been doing within the City of London. That isn't to say that we definitely have a lot further to go, but just to give you a few insights, and I'm really going to try and focus on the tangible, tendery bits due to the subject matter of the session. So we'll just be giving an overview of what we're doing, a strategic angle, and then a bit about examples of what we've done, and then challenges, practicalities, what we've had to face, and then questions and answers of questions are very much welcome. So next slide, please. Can I do it? Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. So, as an overview, we've got, at the City of London, we've got three arms. One is the City Bridge Trust, the charitable arm. One is the local authority, and one is the sort of private business element. So, in terms of the City Bridge Trust, we give 15 million a year in charitable grants. We've also got a social investment fund. Our Economic Development Office, which procurement work closely with, deal with City Action and Heart of the City, various external-facing initiatives with local businesses to really try and encourage them to embed corporate responsibility into their business practices. We've got the Department for Children and Community Services, which run apprenticeships. They have the more social role within the organisation. And what I've really recognised since starting as the responsible procurement manager at the City of London is the value of collaboration between all these different silos, and they still are silos, but we're trying to break down those barriers within the organisation, working together towards a common goal of leveraging as much social value as we can through planning, through our commissioning services, through everything that we do. So collaboration is key, and in terms of external collaboration, I established recently with the City of Westminster a London Responsible Procurement Network, and that has been really fundamental in terms of putting together ideas, making sure that we're not reinventing the wheel, sharing best practice, sharing real tenders with one another, and we're now creating some mini work working groups on putting together an ethical sourcing template that all of us can use. So I really would advise you to communicate with other people in your sector, in your region, get together and just be totally open and honest with one another. That's really been the key, has been nobody takes detailed minutes, you're all totally open and honest about your mistakes as well as your progress. So we have one of our members here from the Met Police, hello Andy. So we've got sort of 25 boroughs now, all of the GLA family, and we're trying to get all London boroughs involved. Now, it's not just about exchanging best practice. One of the best things that's come out of this is the fact that we are speaking with one voice to the supply chain. So not just in terms of really driving demand with our big suppliers, but also in terms of creating a level playing field, or rather creating one single message so that suppliers know what they should be focusing on, what they should channel their efforts towards. If they're all doing different things and spending their resources in ad hoc ways, it's not useful. We need to be speaking as one voice as the local government sector. So this in a nutshell is our new responsible procurement strategy. I do apologise if some of you can't read it. I've tried to fit it into one slide. But in very basic terms, we've split the responsible procurement strategy into 3 pillars. The first being social value. Now that's everything that we do that has some kind of local impact, whether it be a local environmental impact or a potential impact on local people. Now this can be either a positive or a negative impact, and we're obviously trying to mitigate the negative impacts such as air pollution and really leverage our contracts to maximise social value. So that's split into 3 policy areas. Environmental sustainability, that's throughout the supply chain, so that's not just the local impacts within the square mile or the boroughs that we address. It's right from raw material extraction through to delivery of the service or works or the goods delivered. The third one is the most tricky. It's because it's, especially in some sectors, it's not very developed, but I would potentially say one of the most fundamental, just making sure that everybody in our supply chain has human rights, workers' rights, is being respected, is being paid fairly. There's no dodgy dealings and bribery, corruption going on. So it's much harder to get into the tender process, but we're working on it. So one of the most interesting things that we've done that really has worked and that I would recommend that people actually consider is establishing a social value panel. So this consultation panel is basically made up of SE UK here, a number of different independent organisations that hold us accountable to what we're doing with our tenders. So for every over-overdue service contract that we commission or we procure, and some works contracts now we're putting in as well, it's put before a panel of local community organisations, local businesses, environmental organisations, social enterprise representatives, and they really take us to town on everything that we're doing in terms of, are we breaking things into lots? Are we considering apprenticeships? Is this going to have an impact on small business? What about logistics? What about air quality? They really put all these questions forward. We have to consider them. So this happens quarterly, and then in the next quarter we have to report back on exactly what we've done, at which stage of the procurement process to address their recommendations. So we can't obviously take every single recommendation into account, but if we don't, we have to justify why not. So, and this is becoming more and more transparent. We're trying to broaden the scope of the procurements we look at with this panel, but I think transparency is the key. I think it's great that we're held to account, and it really means that we are given the resources internally to do what we need to be doing. So, onto the juicy stuff. These are real mechanisms that we use. So, we've established, quite a few years ago now, a 10% minimum threshold of quality criteria in every single over-overdue tender has to be allocated to corporate responsibility. So, what you're going to allocate that to depends obviously on the nature of the contract. We sometimes have real battles between, okay, so if this is a construction contract, should we really be pushing for the heavy goods vehicles to have low emissions, or if we're doing that, are we going to be negating bidding from SMEs? So we do have a struggle, but some are more obvious than others. But the social value panel does help out with that allocation, what it should be given to in the award criteria. Also, as many of our contracts are you know, 70-30, let's say, if they're giving 10% of the quality criteria, that's only 3% overall. So we've set a minimum threshold of 5% overall. So they can't get away with 3%. By they, I mean service departments who we work very closely with and we're building up a very good relationship with recently. In terms of 1 in 3 quotes, we make sure that every time we go out for a quote for anything, product, service, works, 1 in 3 of those quotes must be either from a local business, an SME, or a social enterprise. It doesn't guarantee them work, but at least they get their foot in and they've got a much more likely chance of getting into our supply chains. And we do use the biosocial directory for that when looking for social enterprises. It's a directory, an online directory created by SE UK in partnership with the City of London. And yeah, I'd recommend that you look at that if you're looking to go out for quotes from social enterprises. And just to carry on in that vein in terms of social enterprises, what we're doing at the moment is focusing on 3 areas where we know the social enterprise market is very developed. So we're trying as best we can to reserve particular contracts of below a certain value, being events catering, waste streams, and PR and marketing for social enterprises. So we're really creating a big push on that. And if it works and if those contracts are successful, we're going to broaden the scope, but that's what we're starting out with. In terms of price variance, you can ask for 2 different prices. If you're very worried about putting extra specs in that are going to ramp up the price of your tender and you're worried what the service department or the finance department are going to say, ask for 2 prices. This worked really well with us with the cleaning tender that we most recently did. We asked for 1 price for standard cleaning products, 1 price for government buying standards approved cleaning products, which is basically a set of environmental criteria established by DEFRA, and then a 3rd totally wild specification of cruelty-free cleaning products, so none tested on animals. I didn't know how that was going to go down, and I did get a very shocked face from the service department, but we put that request in for the 3 different prices, and the winning bidder actually came back and just gave us the price for all of them and said, we're already compliant. So now we've got the biggest cleaning service in the country that uses totally cruelty-free products for no additional price, and that's a really good thing, a good example to be able to give. I know with the Transport for London tender they did, asking for fair trade cotton with all of their Olympic ambassador uniforms. They had 10,000 different uniforms. There was a price difference, but it was something like 2%. So they said to their finance board, okay, it's 2% more for fair trade, are you prepared to pay it? So at least you've got that there to say to your senior people, look, put your money where your mouth is. If you care about this, this is what it's going to cost. So that is an advantage. And it means that you're not going to get no bidders whatsoever, because that's always a bit of a worry. Yeah, and in terms of, if you're dealing with a really obscure contract where you think, I'm never going to be able to get social value out of this, it's a forensic contract for testing nasty substances, or it's a software specialist that only deal with this, how am I going to get social value out of it? What you do is you create really robust policies, which I'll come on to in a second, and then you basically say, how are you going to share in our commitment to this, this, and this throughout the lifetime of the contract? Yes, it has to be relevant and proportional to a certain extent, but if you've got those really robust, well-articulated policies in place, you have every right to ask, how are you going to share it in our commitment? And I would always advise that you try and get them to give quantifiable answers rather than just woolly, look at our brochure, we're wonderful with CSR. What are they actually going to give? And then give it in full-time employee hours, give it in a price per apprentice. Make it measurable so that you can be more, you can justify your decisions at the end of the day, and you can monitor them more effectively afterwards. There we go. So last slide here, practicalities, challenges and lessons learned. As I just said, robust policies in place. You need your senior level support. You need that justification from the very top. So I hope that everyone in here is on that journey to convincing your senior leaders to support you. In terms of finance, central kitties have worked quite well for us in terms of, we've got an energy efficiency fund. It's something like 500 grand a year over 5 years, and it's a regenerative fund. So you need an initial amount of money to do energy efficiency renovations within your organisation, but they pay back in the long term. So taking a life cycle costing view of this, these central pots can really help. Also with the London Living Wage, we needed that initial central pot of money to top up our existing contracts that didn't have London Living Wage in, but from now on they're being met by the service providers. And I'm trying at the moment to create a central kitty for example, we've got a new rule within the city that nobody is allowed to buy a diesel vehicle unless it's totally operationally necessary, such as a tractor. And sometimes the service department is going to have a problem with funding that, so a centralised kitty for that top-up is sometimes useful if you can do it. What gets measured gets treasured, I heard in a previous presentation I saw today, which is a much nicer way of putting it, but it is fundamental. You really need to look at what you're doing in order to make sure you're getting what you pay for, so that you're held accountable and so that your suppliers are held accountable too. And I would definitely say it's not just a quantitative measure. You obviously need that to justify to your finance department, etc. But where it comes to things like apprenticeships, ask for testimonials. Ask what they got out of it. Did they get stuck in a cabin making tea for the whole time? Don't let your suppliers away with sort of tick boxing. Testimonials, you're allowed to ask for them, and it's a useful way of finding out whether there was any real value in it. And coming back to collaboration, as I said with the London Responsible Procurement Network, it's really worked. It's taken a lot of burden from each of our individual shoulders, and we've also got a lot more clout when you collaborate. Metrics. When you're going out for a contract, talk to your supplier and ask them what they want to be measured on and what's reasonable. So don't just enforce things on them that aren't necessarily going to be easy to report on and that aren't the real value that you could get out of the contract. Talk to the supply chain, because they can often offer some really good ideas. And final point about just talking to your suppliers actually works. Even if you're in a current contract, they might be able to do more. So we approached our current taxi service provider and said, look, we'd really like default hybrids as part of our service. What can you do about that? And they said, okay, starting from next month. Didn't cost us any more, and we've even been able to start doing these geofencing pilots where for certain areas in the city where there's very sensitive receptors outside hospitals or schools, they switch from petrol to electric mode automatically by GPS, and they're just doing that, no extra cost. So do talk to them. It's not always going to cost you more in the end. So do I take questions now? Or? Lovely, thanks then.
Okay. Thank you very much, Natalie. Some really fantastic stuff in there that City of London are doing, and the journey they're on has been really interesting to see. Moving from City of London, public body who are required to look at social value, to one that isn't in Asda, and Richard's going to talk a bit about what they're doing in this space and how that's developed over recent times. So Richard, thank you.
Great. I'll stay seated because I haven't actually got any slides. So yeah, I'm going to talk about something slightly different, I guess, from some of the conversations I've heard in the previous slots, and also just then around what I would call procurement. So within Asda, we obviously have procurement teams where we call it goods not for resale, but it's things that aren't going into shops, so the services and things that we require as a large business, which is something we're looking at, I'm very interested in and learning a lot today. But what I want to talk about is an initiative that we've launched in Scotland recently with Social Investment Scotland using the carrier bag levy, which is actually about looking at products and social enterprises that are producing product and how we can create that route to market and trying to create a virtuous circle where we can commercially benefit from actually offering our customers something different, where the social enterprises can actually tap into our 18 million customers a week. So it's slightly different, I appreciate, but hopefully it's interesting nonetheless. So the carrier bag charge came in Wales, and we, like all the other retailers, I think at first, jumped into grant giving. We went down the very local route, giving out very small grants. A couple of our competitors joined up with big national charities. This went on for about 3 years, and in Scotland we kind of got to a point where we thought, you know, we want to do something a bit more sustainable here. We want to do something a bit different, and that was when we started looking at social investment and started speaking to Social Investment Scotland. So, in all honesty, it was very new. It was born out of the CSR department, which I head up. We did it for a year, with 50% going to social investment and 50% going out in grants to a different organisation. It was hugely successful in terms of the conversations we were having with the social enterprises that have applied for the loans, and we thought, we were kind of missing a trick a little bit here, and there was a huge opportunity to use an organisation the size of Asda or Walmart to actually look at, well, surely there's something bigger than this, surely we can help get these products onto our shelves in an ever increasingly competitive retail market. Any USP is something worth exploring. So we started looking at whether we could replicate what we'd already done around local sourcing. So Asda has a very successful local sourcing program. This is working with small local suppliers, taking them through a 6-month development academy to try and get their product into store. It's been hugely successful, double-digit sales growth year on year for the last 10 years, which is rare at the moment within retail. And we started looking at it and saying, well, why on earth couldn't we do the same thing? Only where we actually could create a development academy for social enterprises where we share some of the skills within our business and some of the resources that we've got to help these entrepreneurs, also learning from them how we can better market these social enterprise products, because there's a huge piece of learning there for retailers. We can also offer these investment loans. So that's where we're at the moment in Scotland, and we just launched it recently. It's fascinating. So from my perspective, I do head up the CSR department. When I took the role, it was very much a traditional CSR role. I look after all the big national charity campaigns we have. I look after the local community programme in stores. We're no different to the other big retailers. It's all about philanthropy. I'd say we're probably 10 years behind a lot of other industries. And I think it's probably just down to the fact of the sheer volume of customers and the diversity of our customer base. Of 18 million customers in Asda a week. I think it's 200 million across Walmart globally. There's so many distractions, so every good cause can somehow link to a supermarket on the basis that we've got customers from all different backgrounds. Having witnessed it, not just in Asda but other retailers, I don't think it is about short-term PR gains. I do genuinely think most of the time it is well-intentioned. It's just they tend to flip from one good cause to another. And I think my greatest challenge in embedding this is showing that there is a real long-term value, both commercially for Asda, if we can own this space and create something different from our customers, from the other retailers, but also in the actual social impact of acting as a catalyst and supporting social enterprises to have impact, as opposed to Asda trying to have the impact through very distinct projects or grants. And it is a challenge. You know, you're talking, I was in one of the conferences earlier where we were talking about, you're talking 3 years before you'll see that social impact and be able to record it and pull it back. Now, it's quite difficult to tell an executive board of a large retailer, I'm talking about a project that's going to take 3 to 5 years till we start seeing that return. So it's really interesting today hearing how different people have used everything from stories to very advanced data measurements to how they tell that. And that's one of the things that we're working with Social Investment Scotland on, to use their expertise to tell that story. We do still have, you will still see, so I guess it's multi-tiered, our approach to CSR, and this is the newest element of that, and you will still see your sort of classic philanthropic programs, your national charity campaigns, things that we use for advertising, but this is very, very different. So although it's driven by me, and I keep having these questions about, well, CSR's dead, etc., I would argue it absolutely isn't, because you still need those teams to drive this change. People are starting to get it, and we're not talking to marketing teams, we're talking to the traders and the people that actually run the business behind the scenes and choose what goes on the shelf. So I'm happy to take any questions about it later, but hopefully that's of interest, even though it's not about core procurement as such.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard. And now moving on to our third example, the social enterprise, James and Fusion 21.
Thanks, Charlie. I've got a couple of slides, but I won't bore you with them too much. Got a notepad with an LFC logo on for Liverpool, just to let you all know that I'm a big Reds fan. I'm going to take a different perspective, really. We're a social enterprise procurement business. We drive social value out of the procurement process. But I'm going to talk about the impact, because I've been listening today and I've been reflecting, and I'm thinking, well, I think I'm a beneficiary of social value. One of 5 boys lived in a council flat in Liverpool. Dad was a docker, mum was a cleaner. My dad lost his job under the Tory government in the 80s. I'm not getting political, just a fact. And what happened was, my older brothers went on the old, everyone remember the YTS system, £20 odd a week. And it was my turn, I was leaving school in 1983. It's my turn to go under YTS. And this, so I see social value in this context. It's about opportunity. So it's about opportunity for people in the main, or businesses which help people. But what happened in 1983 was fascinating for me. 2 years after the Toxteth riots, we lived in Toxteth as well. So things were really interesting. A lot of the dads were losing their jobs. A lot of the mums were cleaners, as I said, my mum was. Then something really interesting happened. I went to a secondary modern school, and every 5 years, so I got lucky, I'm here today. The clash of me being here today is luck. Every 5 years, a guy from our community, who was now working for the Sangster Group, Bain and Sangster, the pools organisation, Robert Sangster, who had the horse racing, multi-millionaires, he used to come back every 5 years and pick one person out of the local secondary modern school and give them an opportunity for an apprenticeship. Fortunately, I was that young person that year. And what that opportunity allowed me to do was get an apprenticeship, do day release, go on to do a BTEC. I ended up at the Polytechnic doing a degree, couldn't believe it. My dad was saying, what do you mean, what are you doing? You know what you're doing, son? Done a postgrad, ended up going into academia, went to Hong Kong, taught out in China, come back, started my own business, and I sold that business to Fusion 21. So social value for me is about opportunity. It's about how we interpret that opportunity, not in words and strategies and etc. Because as you can see, I'm involved in the strategy of this business. But it's how you look and feel and touch and demand that social value is derived out of the work we do. So that's just what about Fusion. Take it from me, Fusion 21 are a really good, progressive social enterprise. They were established in 2002, because they bought my company, I wasn't there at the beginning. And it was 7 housing associations got together and said, how are we going to create efficiencies, and then from that efficiencies use some of the savings to deliver social value. Which is a great idea, the concept, the model is great. So what they did was they bulk procured, so when one of them needed 500 kitchens under the Decent Homes programme, they bought 5,000 because they aggregated, they got savings. So they took some of them savings and then they invested it in social programmes, pre-employment programmes, helping young people get opportunities, offenders, ex-offenders, etc. So a suite of on a different range of social value programmes. Then something again changed. I arrived in the business in September 2013, which coincided with austerity. And what I was told when I arrived in the business was, the clients now who used us, they didn't want to pay the 1% levy. Because when I was talking to Charlie before, he said some of the issues, well, this is a challenge. We're a social business, embedded in social housing, bulk procuring, and doing lots of good things. So created lots of employment for lots of disadvantaged people in communities. The day I arrived, I was told the 1% levy's going. You're not fit for purpose. You're too expensive. And by the way, your social value, what you do, we now do it as housing associations. So we don't want it. So I thought, well, this is great. I've arrived just at the right time with the right organisation. So what happened is, very difficult, but nevertheless, the challenge was, you know, how do you address it? So we've gone through a transformation programme, and the best way to explain a transformation programme is, I've got transitions, this is going to be terrible. Hang on. Okay, that's it, okay. See that sums up our transformation. This is what we did. When the client group, housing mainly, said, we don't think you're right for us, we had to be competitive. So whether we like it or not, social value it's great stuff, but it's about cost. So what they said was, you need to be cheaper. They stripped the 1% levy out. So there's no levy now to do social value, so there's a challenge. The right-hand side here is our members consortium. They're a group of housing associations who say, we will commit to procure via you, but you're not getting your levy. They then go on to say that your social value is irrelevant. So what's our future? So we had to do something quite dramatic. And in terms of the message today, this is it. We created only December last year, it took that long, to create the Fusion 21 Foundation. And we created it in such a way that that's the parent of the organisation. So what you see on the left-hand side is the procurement business, which is a social enterprise. Now, here's the clever bit. All the surplus generated from the procurement, which we do now, is now reinvested after our costs back into the foundation. And then what we do with the foundation, we say to different clients, different organisations, apply for funding from £1 to £50,000 through our foundation. Now, we've recently committed to 3 pilot projects in Liverpool. Great organisation, some of you guys will definitely know the wonderful Claire Dove at Blackburn House. We've done a wellbeing programme, Headstrong, vulnerable women, absolutely fantastic programme. We spent £25,000 on that programme and we recorded over 1.5 million of social value back. We then invested £25,000 in Everton, the Everton Development Trust, and then an organisation, and check them out if you get a chance, of Ladders of Life. They deal with people with ADHD. It's absolutely inspiring what they do. So we funded one of their programmes, went to the graduation recently. It was some of the best stuff you've ever seen, to be honest, in terms of how social value really impacts. So our model has evolved. What we do now is we still procure, mainly for housing. We use our surplus to put into the foundation. It's got some trustees, and then organisations and our clients are like-minded can apply. Now that's strategically very important because due to austerity, and anyone in the rooms in housing at the moment, you'll realise that with the 1% cut on the rent, which they've all been applied to the business plans, they're being decimated in housing associations. They are going to be private rented organisations soon. They're not going to be social housing organisations, unfortunately. So anyway, with that pressure, that's compounded the issue. So us to be able to change our model and do it this way has been really important. But what the housing associations are saying is, we like projects in the community. We don't necessarily want you to deliver it, but our foundation can fund it. So the cycle in terms of what we do now is clients doing business with us. And what we're saying is, you procure through us, we'll use our surplus to fund your community projects. So the money which you've been cut and you can't afford to do, we can do it for you in like a partnership approach. So the final few comments from me will be the future. The future is definitely not just one sector like housing. We have to diversify to survive. So we're now looking at health, which is, anyone in health? Goodness me, what an area that is. Higher education, that all organisations who procure, and it's amazing when you talk to them about how they procure, and the emphasis on cost, and we're saying cost and value. If you do your value and your cost together, you can achieve stuff through this model. You don't have to just go for cost. And they're looking at you going, it's interesting, because they don't want to pay the extra, but they get the extra by doing it this way. So that's it. Okay, thank you, and have a nice afternoon. Cheers.
Thank you very much, James. So 3 really interesting and very different perspectives from very different businesses, but with some commonalities across them, I think. So we've now got about 20 minutes, just over, for questions. So who would like to kick off? Someone, yes, lady over there. Is there a microphone?
Shall I just shout?
Yeah, I think you might just have to shout. I'll repeat the question as well. Just so.
Yeah.
There's a danger that you could, completely drive down costs, squash all kind of social enterprises or kind of even value add businesses within that, in order to get this money to then reinvest in good causes. And how do you make sure you can square those two things?
Yeah, I'll just repeat the question for people who are watching on the stream, just in case I can't get that. So the question was for James, and it was about how he's actually looking to embed social value in the procurement process itself.
So thanks for the question. Yeah, it's a good question. During the transformation, when we used to have the 1% levy, that was specifically in our contract, in our procurement contract. That's been taken out now, and what we've put there is a commitment to social value in anything above a particular threshold. So for example, in that instance, say we said 500,000, if it's a £500,000 project, anything to do with social value, the organisation will either demonstrate it to us, but if they can't, we will deliver it for them. So we put them in all our, we've just revised all the framework agreements. So the framework deliverers, the contractors will sign up to a condition, a clause in our contract, where every one of our contracts has the social clause, which makes reference now, it used to be to the levy, now it's to a commitment to delivering social value. So that's it.
Okay, great. Another question. We do now have a microphone. So, yeah, okay, yeah.
Thank you. So my name is Mike Freeman. I'm from Business in the Community. Richard's really interesting to hear about the work Asda are doing around procurement. Just wondering if there's any lessons learned from the work you've done in Scotland so far, working with social enterprises to get them into Asda's supply chain, whether there's things that you could share with other social enterprises in the room that are sort of big obstacles that they're facing, current challenges, and also the future, whether you're planning to roll that programme out beyond Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, it's a good question that we're still looking for the answer for. So we're going to have the first Development Academy in June, and we are currently relying on SIS to do a lot of research in terms of what barriers exist for social enterprises, and the lessons that we can learn. We're working with other partners like Cardiff University in terms of what materials would be at that Development Academy. The rollout plan as it stands, so we just launched in Scotland in January, to say that 100% of our carrier bag fund will go into this, into Social Investment Scotland, with 50% of that going into this Development Academy product-based social enterprise loan. And we're going to launch in Wales in April, with the view to launching in England in January next year. So the Development Academy in the summer will be for social enterprises in Wales and Scotland. We've already had a few sign up and lots of expressions of interest since the PR last week around that launch. The actual contents of it are still being formulated. So we have an awful lot of learnings within our business of the barriers that exist for any local supplier, and a lot of that will be relevant. A lot of it's about dispelling myths or explaining how you approach a business like Asda. I think one of the most interesting bits for me is the support that's been given by established social enterprises. And just to name one, Cafe Direct, for example, that we do stock in our store, yet nobody's ever thought about telling the story behind Cafe Direct to our customer and the impact that that could have. So we've got lots of lessons to learn from examples like Balloon Water that have got into mass retail, what the barriers were. Most of it's around promotion and having traders within our businesses understanding the competitive advantage those products can have. What you normally see with an example like Cafe Direct is they're competing on quality and price, but they're never getting to talk about their USP, which is the social value piece. And for us, that's a bit silly, really, because it's something we can sell more of those products if we tell that story. So I think a lot of it is around that. A lot of it's who you approach. So a lot of people, if you have a really good product, you will go in against anyone that's not a social enterprise and talk directly to a trader who may or may not understand this and may or may not have an interest in marketing it for you. There are other routes. So the local sourcing team, for example, take cohorts of local suppliers, take them through all this training and put them on a shelf. They aren't. So for example, I don't know, if you had a soap product, you could either go to the local sourcing team and get all that support and nurture to get on the shelf, or you could approach a trader who will look at it very black and white and just treat you as P&G, and probably have a more black and white view of it and not look at the longer term. So there's an awful lot of learning still to come, and I just encourage any social enterprises that are interested, that are product-based social enterprises, to sort of watch this space, because we obviously want to include as many as we can in these development academies. And I think it's really important for Asda that it's not just about getting these guys onto the Asda shelves. From my perspective, it's preparing them for mass retail. If Asda choose not to take advantage of that at the end of that process and they end up on a Waitrose shelf, then so be it.
Great, thank you. I had a question from Colin at the back. Shannon.
Hi Shane, sorry, thanks Shane. My name's Colin Downey from the Wild Hearts Group. I'm the sales director in the Wild Hearts Group. So we're a social enterprise and we sell product and we want people to buy our service lines. Natalie, I spoke to you on the phone, met you before as well, and this was sort of, I think, a question for both Natalie and for Richard. In one of the sessions earlier this year, I'm known for sort of making this point. I think, you know, we're perpetually frustrated in our sectors at times of people and businesses, corporate business, who walk the walk at their social value leadership piece. So they're driving social value at the leadership piece, but the actual procurement teams are not engaged with that thought leadership and sort of thinking, how can I bring social value into my supply chain? So I don't want to put a product on your shelf. We sell office supplies and printing services, example. I would like, as to the retail channel, I'd be a supplier within your back office services, if you like. Is your procurement teams on that journey with you as you, you know, I know you've alluded to things from what you're putting on your shelves, but are they looking to get social enterprise suppliers into their supply chains? Look at what Natalie's done at the City of London, it's great. They're on a bit of a journey. I just have wondered if ASDA were on that journey too. And have you considered targeting your procurement professionals internally because you have targets for savings, there's targets for SMEs, you know, there's targets for other things, but still in this sort of day and age with all these corporate businesses looking at social value, I find it very rare that you're targeted to bring social enterprises into your supply chain. So I wonder if you had some thoughts or comments on that.
Yeah. In all honesty, we're very early on. I think we've been invited kindly to a couple of events that Social Enterprise UK have put on. And met various businesses that are much further on in that process, and it's absolutely fascinating to hear some of the challenges that they face, whether it's actually being able to identify whether social enterprises within their supply chain, the scale of social enterprises to meet some of the procurement needs, and whether that falls beneath a certain threshold, whether they're even measuring it. So in terms of our thinking, we're starting with the product piece and actually putting it on shelf, and this isn't about treating social enterprises is kind of a quaint little experiment on the side. It's absolutely about how you embed them alongside the rest of these guys and create a commercial value. How you do that within a core procurement, like you say, sort of service-led, is a challenge. I have had very initial conversations with our heads of procurement about this. They showed great interest. I think it'd be a fascinating case study. Walmart, in general, in terms of their procurement-led, we are very lean, very efficient, and a bit like dealing with traders in a big retailer, it seems when you first set out on that journey that it's a huge step you're asking them to take. And I think I've learned an awful lot today and other things with Social Enterprise UK about how businesses have done that. But I do think, I'm not sure how we're going to do it, but I feel like some of the stories I've heard, it still feels a little bit like traditional CSR. I think it has to be more than that, and it's how you break that down and measure it without actually just doing it because it's something nice on the side that you can talk about. It's actually finding the value in doing it. So Interserve, for example, are working on a project in Yorkshire with us with BITC, the ARC project, and I'm hoping that through that we're going to, basically all our senior directors and above, as part of their development programme, will have to volunteer within social enterprises in the Yorkshire area. And what I'm hoping that will do is trigger that response. I have all my senior colleagues will fully understand what a social enterprise is and what we're trying to do with CIS. And hopefully we can start to break that down. But in all honesty, we are very much at the beginning of that journey.
Natalie, anything to add on that?
Yeah, just briefly. So because we're choosing initially 3 areas that we're focusing on in terms of social enterprises, I'm engaging the 3 category managers that are in charge of those areas. So bringing them to meet different social enterprises, raising awareness that way. In terms of the people, the procurement operations team who do the 1 in 3 quotes, I'm going to start rolling out some training. I only just got the responsible procurement strategy sent to committee last week, so I'm at the very early stages at the moment, but there's going to be a whole series of training after that. But one of the most useful things you can do, if you can persuade your senior leadership team, is to get sustainability or corporate responsibility objectives into staff evaluations. Especially, it's not common in the public sector, but with us, you have to get outstanding or very good in 6 different objectives in order to get a pay rise, and CSR is one of them. And that's right to the head of sourcing. So they just take it that bit more seriously. That's what humans are like.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add from my perspective, I think, is that you know, be it a local authority or a large business, I think they're big organisations, and sometimes when leadership does the right thing, and all of our evidence would say that leadership is absolutely critical to making this happen, to making that first step. But for that to then percolate out across a very large organisation, some of which move slower than others, takes time, and I think while this is a change program and there's a lot of this is on businesses to look at how they can push that out, I think also from a supplier perspective, as social enterprises or other businesses trying to access those supply chains, it's about understanding that some people might not be there yet and highlighting that within the business, because no leadership will want to make statements like we're going to be open social enterprise and then be made to look bad because their procurement person at the end of one line isn't aware of it, doesn't know what it is. So I think it's on both sides to understand the kind of context in which people are operating, but also to kind of highlight that so that we can then take that forward and progress that. And that's an important part of our role, I think, as Social Enterprise UK, to help be a kind of broker or mediator in that process as well, and help push that forward, because I think both sides are aware of that. Got a question at the front here.
Thank you. My name is Hugh Sava. I'm from a company called Femora, and we're a social enterprise. We teach sign language courses and Deafway courses to both the deaf and hearing community. So Deafway is basically a course that tries to bridge the gap between the hearing and the deaf community, because that's a barrier that we find that we face. And I feel that with tendering, there is some limitations there. And for me, my concern is deafness isn't something that's very known, and I feel it worries me that the panel would get an application about the deaf community, and they'll see our business, and because they don't have any idea of that deaf culture history, I think that kind of puts us on the back burner. And also, as you can see, my first language is British Sign Language, and some applications are written with a lot of jargon, and you know that is obviously a lack of access. So I just really wonder how we can try and break that barrier down, because I think the deaf community need to be heard and they need to be involved in businesses as well as other disabilities.
Thank you. So that's really a question about, I guess, the accessibility of the tender process. So does anyone want to go at that?
It's a tough one. I think that I would come back to the collaboration that the procurement team need with other service departments. Procurement cannot be experts in every field. They normally are there to try and seek best value. Now, I understand best value as being understanding all sorts of social value that you can extract from tenders, but that's not the way you get taught at procurement school necessarily. So we really do need to collaborate not only with our service departments that have an understanding of deafness and other issues, such as economic development teams, such as, in our case, Department for Children and Community Services. But I would go back to what I said about the social value panel. They are people that are on the ground, that have contact with people every day from representing lots of different communities. So we need to listen to them, and procurers don't have necessarily all those ideas, they need to listen.
Anything else to add?
I mean, I don't have a great deal of expertise within procurement myself, but it's interesting to hear that I'm sure that that's the case where your procurement team is not linked into other parts of the business, and like you said, they're not going to be experts in it. So I don't know what the gentleman's experiences have been of surfacing any issues that they've had in the past, but it feels like a barrier that may exist that the procurement guys aren't aware of. And I'm sure that goes across a whole range of diverse issues. So,
I think there's probably two things I'd add. I think one is that from a public commissioning perspective, certainly there's been a lot of work going on about simplification of the tender process, generally, for everyone, and that's kind of all communities have been struggling with different processes and so on. I think that the second thing, and one of the biggest things we've seen through social value, and several panelists have talked about this earlier, is that it's created so many more kind of partnerships, collaborations, working with different people in different ways, and if working with charities or other groups who are representing the deaf community or other different communities, and how that can help bring supply diversity is an often talked about word, but how that can help to bring that in and help to ensure that procurement isn't just something that's operating in isolation to get things as cheap as possible, but it's something that working with the communities around it, that's a really important piece.
We've just got a new set of terms and conditions simplified for SMEs now. With public procurement, you're not allowed to create one set of T's and C's for one size company and one for another, but what you can do is for the lower value procurements, use the simplified terms and conditions and also use the simplified PQQ, for example.
Yeah, I had a question from the gentleman here. Microphone, Jan? Sorry, down here.
Thank you. My name's Tom Levitt, writer and consultant. Just relating to the last question, first of all, I would hope all three of the organisations represented would be able to produce a tender in a sign language format on video if they were asked to do that. I think the Disability Discrimination Act calls for reasonable adjustments, and that would be a reasonable adjustment. The point I was going to say was to Natalie. I don't know how long you've been at the City of London, but 2 or 3 years ago you had an event called 50 in 250, which was part of a programme by the City of London Corporation to encourage businesses within the city to bring social enterprises into their supply chains. And I'd like to ask what was the success of that programme, because I'm not sure I ever heard, and whether it's been repeated or going to be.
Well, interestingly enough, I actually heard yesterday that London Borough of Camden did something very similar, and they did 100 in 100, and they were successful. Unfortunately, yeah, I only joined in March, and I'm not sure. It was something run by the Economic Development Office, but fingers crossed they did achieve their goal, but I'm afraid I'm not sure. I'll follow that.
There's definitely, yeah, I mean, from our perspective, I think that campaign ran into some challenges in terms of some of the expectations that it created around some buyers, and I think it created a few problems. So some of the businesses that were engaged, I think, either started looking in the wrong place or not working with the right people to engage in the right way. I think we are, as Social Enterprise UK, a lot of our work around brokerage and working with both public and private bodies has been about probably starting with kind of manage expectations about what can be achieved short term, but then looking to grow that in a sustainable way, because a lot of this is about momentum. And a key thing when you're engaging a big business or a big organisation of any kind actually is that what you don't want early on is negative experiences or things going badly or that, because that can create can stop things dead in their tracks and you can never recover them again. And I think what we're now getting back to a point, I think, where we're looking, and in the next few months hopefully we'll be launching something that will start to broaden out that engagement again and look at kind of mass adoption from a number of large organisations around this space. So can't announce anything now, but yes, in the next few months we will be doing something in that space. So, other questions from anyone? Yes, a question there. Yeah. Just wait for the microphone. Sorry, microphone's just there. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Louise again. I just wondered if the panel had any reflections on the balance between kind of quality, price and social value. So what I've heard is when the Act originally came in, there was a big drive on price, and one of the kind of underlying assumptions of the Act was that this would try and shift the balance a little bit. But what I've actually heard is that in some scenarios, even when they're taking up, when local authorities, for example, are taking up social value, the slice that's given to social value is taken out of the quality element, so that it isn't actually shifting it to be more important than price. I just wondered if you had any reflections on relative weightings or anything like that that should be given.
Yeah, sure. James.
Yeah. Thanks, good question. Very interestingly, we've done lots of work with big construction companies tendering for local authority school programs. Now, I'm a great believer in the lever for social value or any value in terms of a quality perspective has got to come from the client. We worked on a project with the fire service and they wanted this embedded right way through the supply chain. The key thing was they put it in the tender process and then they wanted it reporting on every month. What I've found with the big projects, school programs, etc., is the public sector client will refer to it. They might call it sustainability, and one of the pillars of sustainability is social value. It's only when you put a percentage mark on it where it becomes a real tangible thing. Because the contractors that we worked on both sides would say, if it's worth nothing in the waiting, we won't put any resource against it. If it's worth 5 points, we'll put a lot of resource, we'll partner with social enterprises to get the maximum, because that could be the differentiator in them winning that contract. And the challenge is, the cost quality one is always an issue. Because before the tenders won, I always found when I had my other business, you were a value point, reference point to them. As soon as they won the tender, you were a cost item. So thanks for winning the job for us, but now you're a cost, so how can we now scrutinise what you're going to deliver? And that is a fine balance, but it's only the client who demands that it's reported on and measured that keeps that sort of agenda flowing. So,
Any other comments on that from anyone?
As I said in the presentation, we've got 10% as standard. That can get watered down if the quality marks are less than the price marks, which sometimes does happen. But yeah, just to reiterate what James said, if you have incentives as well as penalty clauses in your KPIs, it just gives people a bit more of a carrot and a stick approach. Yeah.
And I think from a product, and I know it's different again, but from a product perspective, my experiences so far have been very different to what I expected. So the initial conversation I had with our local sourcing team went very differently to the one I imagined, in the sense that the guy, first impression was, great, can they come and talk to the other local suppliers about becoming social enterprises? It was kind of, oh, hang on a minute, one step at a time. But the idea of if a product has something different about it, so the value to him in the social value is actually of more interest than any cost price. And I think a lot of social enterprises I've spoke to probably don't think that's the case. And actually, if you want to work with an Asda, we're probably very much about how can you shrink the cost of your product so we can make more profit margin. When actually, his first reaction was the total opposite. If you're working with lots of local suppliers, they need a unique selling point, and actually the social value could be the thing that gets them on the shelf.
On that positive note, that there's value in being a social enterprise, I think we'll stop it there. Thank you very much to all three panellists. We'd thank them either way that we go. Thank you.